Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me well enough? Yeah, okay. Good morning. Honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rosanne and I'm going to be your host for this conference. On behalf of British Council Armenia, I wish to extend our warm welcome and thank you to you all present here and all of those joining us online through live streaming for participating in British Council Armenia's first annual Continuing Professional Development Conference for English language teachers and educators, Teaching for Success 2019. We're truly delighted that all British Council Armenia's teacher development events enjoy great popularity and your trust. Because, as you may know, over the next days, we're going to have around 900 participants, which is a new record for us. So, thank you once again for your attendance.
Thank you.
This conference aims to create a platform for us to come together to share and discuss the ways of enhancing teacher quality at all stages of a teacher's career, as well as explore new practices and perspectives on improving the quality of English language learning. I'm optimistic that all of you will acquire new skills and knowledge from this two-day conference. And I would encourage you all to take an active part in the interesting discussions during the plenary speeches, as well as concurrent sessions and workshops, to leave this conference with inspirational thoughts and practical classroom ideas. So, without further ado, let's begin by inviting Ms. Arevik Anapiosyan, RA Deputy Minister of Education, Science, Culture and Sport, to deliver her welcome remarks. Ms. Anapiosyan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Good morning, dear colleagues, dear guests, and I understand that this is being live streamed all over the world. So it is especially for me a great pleasure to make the opening remarks for this conference. British Council for the past years, and especially when I was at the Ministry for the past almost year and a half, has been an amazing partner in doing a lot of projects together, projects that we've been thinking about the ideas while British Council would call it into life. And it's been amazing to have partners, especially to work in very remote areas and in topics that is related to professional development, of the key people in general education reform teachers. So I believe that this conference for this 2 days is going to be a very interesting learning experience, enhanced learning experience, because I believe life is a learning experience. So I did have a chance to look into the speakers that you're going to have and the panelists and the session hosts that you're going to have for those 2 days. And I wish I had less job to do so that I could join some of the sessions, especially on methodology and on assessment. That is my passion, although I'm not an English language teacher. Anyways, I believe that this is a great opportunity for participants to exchange experience, to learn about the practices of teachers in Armenia, and not only. And I trust that since this is the first, although I assume it's already the 5th year that British Council is organizing a similar conference, but I hope that this first conference on teaching for success will become a continuous one, and it is absolutely in line with the reforms that our country is initiating, and I trust that all of you are going to have very valuable and instrumental reform in not only in the country that we all love, which is Armenia, but also in the schools and in the utmost important things in the lives of the people that you are supporting to become valuable citizens of the world. So I thank you and wish you prosperous and very interesting 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anna Christian. We're going to hear more from you today, so thank you once again. And now I would like to invite Alison Chick, the Deputy Head of Mission British Embassy Yerevan, to deliver her welcome speech. Ms. Chick. Good day. One of those days today. Good day. Welcome to the conference. I'm delighted to be standing up here. Welcome to the Deputy Minister and to the British Council. Thank you to the British Council for arranging this conference. I remember 2 years ago I was standing somewhere near here in the same place giving a similar speech, and that was at the very start of being Deputy Head of Mission. So I hope over the last 2 and a bit years I've learnt a lot more, and maybe I'm slightly better at public speaking as well, you never know. But that's sort of what I wanted to speak about today, just briefly, in that, gathering people together to learn new experiences is really, really important, and the British Council is bringing you here to help you and bringing experts to give you new ideas and new techniques for teaching people. Because I'm a firm believer that it's the people who teach me and how they teach me that make me learn, that make me want to learn. For me, it was my German teacher. So I speak languages now, all sorts of different languages. I pick up languages because he had an enthusiasm. It wasn't necessarily because he was teaching me German. It was how he taught me. It was the enthusiasm he had for the subject. And it was the way he helped me understand how to learn the words, how to learn the grammar, which I still hate, but at least I know how to learn it. And that to me is essential. And teaching, I've tried it myself. I'm afraid I'm not very good at it, so I went to do something else and became a diplomat. But teaching, I found, was quite a thankless task, because you're teaching people who don't understand the importance of you in their lives at the time you're trying to tell them that you're important and what you're telling them is important. They only recognize it years later when they suddenly realize, oh, actually, it was that teacher or that person who set me on this path and led me to where I was going to go. Who knows, if my physics teacher had been as engaging as my German teacher, I may have a very different career right now, but it was my German teacher. So you are important. You are shaping the next generation. You are shaping children's lives. And it's not the subject you're teaching them, although English, I will say this, but English is obviously very important. It is a very important piece of the world today. But it's also how you teach them, so that they go away thinking, I can do that. I can actually do that, and I can learn more, and I like learning because this teacher gives me that enthusiasm. They have imparted knowledge to me that I want to keep. So I know you don't often get praise from your students, probably very, very little, but you are important, and you should always remember that you are important and that what you're doing is key to other people's lives. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you and to just say those few words. I do hope that you have a wonderful conference. There are some wonderful speakers and some wonderful topics, and I'm hoping that you will learn newer techniques, more techniques, and that you will be more confident in moving forward and teaching all those young people that you will meet in your lives. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Chit, for your most motivational remarks indeed. Finally, join me to welcome Arevik Saribekyan, British Council Armenia Country Director, for her welcome speech.
Dear Deputy Minister, dear Deputy Ambassador, dear guests, welcome to the British Council Teaching for Success Annual Conference. I want to particularly thank our teachers for sacrificing their weekend to be with us, and it's really impressive that around 900 teachers want to be with us and learn instead of doing something fun in this nice weather. So this actually proves that whatever is happening now is very important, and we appreciate your presence, and we hope that you will find it helpful for your future career. I particularly want to stress that I'm really impressed and happy that we have around 200 teachers who came from regions, registered and came to the regions. As Deputy Minister mentioned, we are working in regions, in remote regions, with teachers, trying to be with you, support you in your development, and I'm really happy that you also volunteer your time to be in Yerevan today to participate in this conference. We have participants from Iran, Georgia, and Russia. I want to welcome you to this conference and to Armenia, and I hope that besides the conference you will also have time to enjoy Yerevan. And of course want to greet our online participants who are watching us through the live stream, and we hope that our quality, technical quality, will help and ensure that you can enjoy the conference. And last but not least, I want to welcome our guest speakers, Stephen Hindlow, who is an ELT professional and trainer and has more than 30 years of experience in the field, and I hope you will enjoy his sessions. And Simon Esserton, who besides being an ELT professional, he's our regional head of English programs. So thank you for being with us. As has already been mentioned, British Council has been operating in Armenia for around 18 years already, and within these 18 years, working with teachers, helping with the development of English language in Armenia has been our priority. So I recognize a lot of faces. You have been in journey with us within these 18 years, and every year we try to do something new, bring you the developments, the latest developments of English language teaching, and share it with us, with you. And although we have been doing this type of conference for the last 5 years, inviting distinguished guests from the UK, professionals trying to share the latest developments, this conference is new by its format, in a sense that besides having the international contribution, we also have the ministry sharing the further developments that they're working on for the teachers' development, and we have also provided platform for our teachers to share what they have learned with each other and learn from each other. I hope that you will enjoy the conference, and I just want to finish by saying the following. We have been discussing yesterday with Ms. Anna Piosyan how important education is. It's actually enabler for the growth across all the sectors. And I want to say that English language is actually enabler for high quality education. So while I respect all the subjects and I'm thankful to all my subject teachers, I think English teachers and actually foreign language teachers have a bigger mission in a sense that you provide your students with an opportunity not only to learn their subjects, but also to be connected with the world, to learn about the further development in their fields. So your mission is very important. We appreciate it. We are with you and hope that we still have a long journey to go together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have two opening speeches. First, I would like to invite Ade Hovasapian, British Council Armenia English and Education Project Manager, to deliver his speech on why teaching for success and the rationale behind this conference. Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear guests. I'm starting very quick. An education system is only as good as its teachers. Can you please raise your hand if you agree with this statement? You liked it, didn't you? Yeah, just like you, I do agree with this statement because I believe it clearly highlights the importance of your role as teachers in an education system's effectiveness and consequently your success within that system. I believe that is why the quest for finding the sense of successful teaching and teacher is a top agenda for most governmental ministries, educational reforms and academics, because they want to understand what contributes to the quality of education, and it seems teachers are the most important component. Obviously, with all the reforms, educational reforms which are with all educational reforms which are undergoing in our country, especially the ones which are with teachers and quality of teaching, Armenia is not an exception. I think everybody in this room acknowledges that if we want our learners to achieve their potential as future change makers, then we need to invest in environments and systems which allow the teachers to reach theirs as current change agents. British Council, as a leading organization which supports a lot of educational reforms, believes in this. And British Council Armenia, likewise, is very much committed to education and teacher development. And that is what, as Arvik mentioned, every year we try to realize small, big and small English projects and programs to make sure that we support the of quality teaching, specifically English language teaching, all over Armenia. Now, to showcase this, I would like to draw your attention to a couple of specific examples and success stories to see how we do this. So, this photo with all happy faces on it belongs to 4 years ago when we started a teacher development and mentoring program for 12 English language teachers in 4 military institutions. Within the 12 months of this project, we helped these teachers to rethink and redefine their teaching methodology and approaches and to perform better in the classroom so that their cadets can learn English effectively. Now, this was a very small scale project in terms of the number of teachers involved, but it had a huge impact on more than 800 cadets who were able to learn English more effectively, which was critical for them to be able to participate in international maneuvers and programs. Next, meet teachers from 3 villages in Armavir region. This is another teacher development program which we delivered in partnership with Children of Armenia Fund charity. And within this project, these teachers not only were able to improve their language proficiency, but of course they improved their teaching skills, knowledge, and competencies. The outcome? More than 300 students in those villages, which were quite isolated kind of, were able to learn English with better methodology, and as a result, hopefully in the long term, they will be able to connect to the outside world beyond the confines of their villages. Of course, in the past 2 years, Arvik and Arvik mentioned, we've been working very closely with education, science, culture, and sport, and through our English learning hubs, we have worked with hundreds of teachers all over Armenia, on every single region. And some examples for you. So, for example, last year, for the very first time, we established our first teacher groups in 7 cities, and by doing so, we brought more than 200 teachers to share their learning ideas and experiences and take responsibility for their own learning. And this was the first time that we did such an activity. Or again, for the very first time, through our learning English learning hubs, we invested in a new online video observation technology to help the teachers who are working in these learning English clubs or learning hubs to be able to record their lessons, and by doing so they were able to see themselves in action, to see their peers in action, and reflect about their strengths and areas in need for development. But moreover, we were able to use mentors sitting in Yerevan, providing very concrete, personalized and practice-based feedback to those teachers, for example, in Bert, in Vaik, in Jermuk, in different regions which are quite far away from us. And of course, needless to say, over the past 5 years, we have offered you teacher development with British Council seminars, during which we hosted the best ELT experts in Armenia, and we try to offer you the latest thinking in the field so that you will be updated and you can make use of the years of teaching, training, and experiences. Now, I know you're asking yourself, but why do I share these stories with you? How are they connected to this conference? Well, the answer is that everything we have done in the past couple of years, and basically everything we do on the teacher development and teacher education programs, is at the heart of them is the British Council's Teaching for Success approach and continuing professional development frameworks. Now, just to provide you with an overview of what this approach is, so the British Council's Teaching for Success basically represents the current insight, research and evidence into effective continuing professional development. And it works at all levels of school and not only. The founding principles are the following. If we want to improve the outcomes of learners, then we need to improve the quality of teaching. And if you want to improve the quality of teaching, the best way is continuing professional development, which is defined as a planned, ongoing, and lifelong learning for teachers so that they can improve their personal and professional qualities. But we also understand that not every single CPD activity is an effective one. Several research studies indicate that if you want your CPD activity to be effective, then they need to be concrete and practice-based, basically not focusing on so much abstract stuff and theoretical stuff, though they're good. Sustained over time, so they shouldn't be just one-off activities. You go to a workshop and participate in one conference, one workshop, and then you're fine for the next 10 years. Of course not. Tailored and context-specific, so it is not one-size-fits-all kind of approach. So it is very specific to the needs of teachers in Armenia, for example, based on the specific needs in your region, so everything is tailored. And it is supportive of collaboration, so it is not very much top-down, a trainer coming and just sharing the knowledge, but teachers also work with one another. And of course, it is fully supported by the educational leadership. Now, the next question would be, then how has the British Council's Teaching for Success put this understanding into practice? The answer, by creating 3 continuing professional development frameworks, one for teachers, one for educators, and one for school leaders. And these frameworks aim to enable education systems and individual teachers, educators, and principals to identify their strengths and the areas in need for development, and as a result put together CPD systems and activities which will meet their needs. Now, To put all I shared with you in a nutshell, actually, I would like to play 2 short videos for you, which are focusing on our CPD framework for teachers and CPD framework for educators, because of the very fact that this conference's focus is actually these frameworks. So I'm going to play this and then I'll continue.
For teachers to engage in successful CPD, they need support to help identify their strengths and the areas they need to develop. The British Council CPD framework for teachers is based on our global knowledge of teaching and is designed to be flexible enough to work across subjects.
Apologies.
For teachers to engage in successful CPD, they need support to help identify their strengths and the areas they need to develop. The British Council CPD framework for teachers is based on our global knowledge of teaching and is designed to be flexible enough to work across subjects and contexts. It provides teachers, teacher educators and school leaders with a common language so they can discuss development needs and set development pathways based on each individual. The framework is built around 12 professional practices. These represent key areas in which teachers apply professional knowledge and utilise specific skills. Each one is interlinked, representing a combination of practical and conceptual understanding, skills and knowledge. Through our self-assessment and classroom observation tools, the framework helps teachers map their skills against the professional practices according to 4 stages. From simple awareness of a practice to an understanding of it, engagement with it, and integration of it into their classes. With this knowledge, teachers, schools and ministries of education can identify the right resources. British Council development materials are mapped to the framework, and we're working with a growing number of education institutions to map their own materials too. All the parameters can be tailored to a specific country's standards. It's not an inspection device. It's a tool to support inclusive, teacher-led self-development, with peer support wherever it's needed.
And the framework for educators.
Teacher educators fulfil a wide range of crucial roles in supporting teacher learning and classroom application of learning. But across many education systems, their roles, responsibilities and development pathways are unclear. The British Council CPD framework for teacher educators is based on our global experience of working in teacher training and development. It's applicable across primary, secondary and tertiary sectors and is relevant in both pre-service and in-service teacher education. The framework has 10 comprehensive professional practices which describe the types of knowledge and skills underpinning teacher educators' work. Uniquely, the framework also incorporates 7 enabling skills. These are general skills needed across professions with a focus on communication and leadership, along with 5 self-awareness features designed to help teacher educators reflect on how their behaviour has an impact on learning, all mapped against 4 stages of development. We provide resources to support teacher educators in improving their skills and knowledge, including a reflection questionnaire to help them assess their competence and identify areas for development. This tool can also be used by education authorities to help plan pathways that improve quality and expertise. We also offer a range of resources on our Teaching English website, such as publications, articles, webinars, videos, research papers, and a range of courses. Ministries of Education and partners can use the framework to plan training and development activity, with guidance on how it can be adapted to local contexts. And we can support the training and development of teacher educators in different roles. It's not a checklist of standards. It's a flexible resource. The practices and stages of development it identifies can be adapted to suit all manner of roles and identities around the world for the greatest possible impact.
Good. And so, as I said, this conference has an overarching focus on these two frameworks. And as you already know, all the sessions that we have planned for you are mapped to these professional practices. So I just want to welcome every single one of you to this conference, thank our guest speakers for accepting our invitation and visiting us, and thank all to other speakers who submitted their proposals to share their learning and experiences with their colleagues. As I mentioned, today and tomorrow we are going to have 3 plenary sessions. We are going to have 20 concurrent sessions, and all these sessions are mapped to professional practices so that they can help your thinking and participation. So I very much hope that you're going to enjoy this conference, and I really want you to get engaged in a process of learning, developing, motivating, getting motivated, and making sure when on Monday you go back to your classrooms, you have a lot of ideas and insight to put into practice. Thank you so much, and enjoy this conference.
Thank you, Ade, for your most informative and interesting speech. Just give us a moment, please. Awesome. Thank you. Next, I'm honored to invite on stage again Ms. Arivik Anapiosyan, our Deputy Minister of Education, Culture, Education, Science, Culture and Sport. Yes. Thank you for that. To give her opening speech by sharing with us the RA Ministry's strategic vision on the topic of continuing professional development in Armenia. Ms. Anapiosyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I didn't plan to appear here twice, but this is how it is. So I'd like to put today's and tomorrow's sessions into the context so that the teachers who are involved in this, especially who are coming from Armenia, could see why we're so much emphasizing their importance and why we believe that they are going to be the most important thing. Not because it's just that, but because we really are going to hinge on your professionalism. So, but before I start, I started by, well, I have this, before having the governmental hat, I was a normal person, and I still teach, but I was teaching more than I do now, and I've been doing a lot of policy research in the field of education, and I know how I've done a lot of observations, and I know how complicated the task, everyday task of teachers is. And I'm coming from a generation of my family that has a generation of teachers, so I also know it by life. So I personally started my teaching career at university, MA level. Then when I gained experience, I moved to teaching at BA level. and I still cannot risk to think of teaching at school. So it was complicated to teach from after MA in BA, so I can't imagine how complicated it is for you to teach at schools. In the field of education, there are two things that we see why we need to do the reform. So in the first place, it is for the development of research, of education, for innovation, for bringing new things into the educational field. But the second thing is that it is the enabling factor for all the other sector development. So in Armenia currently, you've probably, those who are coming from Armenia and have been following the media recently, you've probably learned that our Prime Minister has been very frequently mentioning about the mega goals. So there are 16 mega goals, only one is on education, which is to have educated and competent citizens, but all the other 15s, education is the enabler for the development of rule of law in the country, for the development of connectivity of Armenia to the world, for the development of healthy citizens and the healthcare system. So this second one is very much hinges on the community of teachers at the general education, secondary education, and at the higher education, as well as the vocational education and training. So teaching, first of all, is, as UNESCO has identified, is to be done around these four pillars, which is we do that, we have the educational system because we need to learn to know, then we need to do things with our hands to do. There has been, past year when I had the opportunity to participate in Education World Forum, British Council has very generously organized a session at BC London where the research, they showed some obvious truth, but it is based on research, that when we're being told something, we remember about 5% of that. And from being told something and then all the way towards actually knowing things, we best know things when we do. So we best, I'm a political scientist, I best learned about the theories of politics when I started to teach. So the best thing of learning is when you actually do. An important pillar is that we're, as we all know, there are no borders. Past week we were hosting the World Congress on Information Technology, and the concept of that Congress was amazing, telling all of us that the world is so decentralized today. And Armenia, for 3 days, past week, was the center for the world on information technologies. So we all have to, it's the role of a teacher to teach all of us. I couldn't agree more that we are who we are thanks to the people who we have been exposed to for 10, 12, or I don't know how many years, who are the teachers, oftentimes more than our families. So it's the teacher that has to incept into the citizen this value system that brings to this concept and framework to living together. And also, of course, the UNESCO pillar on learning to be opens up in a more modest way, but I would think that learning to be is about being genuine in the world, in the work that we do. And to be genuine, we need to believe in whatever we're doing. And as Weber would say, every profession is a calling, but I think that the profession of teaching is a bit more calling than the other ones. So, the reforms in the country are going along all the sectors and throughout the hierarchy of the educational system, from preschool to higher education and research. And the general education reform is at the cornerstone, and oftentimes the ministry is being sometimes positively, sometimes negatively blamed of being a ministry of general education, because we're attaching so much importance on general education reforms. And as you probably know, at this very current moment, we're doing the curricular review. Curricular review starts with the review of the general overarching competences, and then to the review of the learning outcomes per school level: primary education, lower secondary education, and upper secondary education. So once we develop this, and there has been for the past week a number of discussions, but once on public discussions on what we have already, drafts that we have developed. So after this, we move towards developing the subject matter standards. And the subject matter, it's standards and programs together. In general, we would say that there are 4 levels of curriculum. The general overarching level of curricula is what the country wants from the educational system. The second level, where we have at the per subject, is what the subject professionals want. The third level is the lesson plan, which is what the teacher wants. And the fourth level is what the learners actually learn, and we know about it through the assessment pieces. So we are currently working on the first and second level, and then we will be working on the third and fourth level. So we start with the review of the curriculum, then move to the review of the subject matter syllabi. Then, in between these two, which is the subject matter syllabi and lesson plan, there are textbooks. And oftentimes, to know what actually the learners are learning, what they know, we open the textbooks and try to figure out what are the topics that are there. So we will be working on developing the teaching and learning materials. And I want to emphasize here that I don't use the word textbook. It's teaching and learning material, because we trust teacher is the best master of the ceremony in the classroom, and he or she should be the professional who can pick what to include in the classroom for teaching and learning purposes. So we will be developing teaching and learning materials, obviously giving freedom to schools, and I trust to teachers to pick whatever they're going to use in the classroom. Then, of course, it's the chronological timeline. Then we will be moving towards, and we have already started, on the teacher professional development. For the past years, we have reviewed that the existing system of teacher professional development has probably not been the best, and oftentimes not as successful as the country probably intended it to be. That's why we are creating a new system. It's not that we are reinventing the wheel, but we're very much hinging on what is already invented. British Council CPD framework has been a great and formative input. And when Ada was showing, I opened up our standards to see whether they completely overlap or just there is huge reference, and I'll be quiet about it. We'll see. So, but it's been really, so we are working on also developing a whole framework that includes not just face-to-face interactions, but also mentorship, coaching, and continuous interaction. And it's not that one teacher who is doing a seminar on a subject, on any given subject, cannot be a student in another seminar that is on, say, methodology. So the whole concept that there are teachers and learners is being mixed. We see more of a community of teachers, which is a network where they can learn, we all can learn from each other. We are also thinking within this current reform agenda, that since we are going to develop the modules for for the professional development, and the modules range from subject matter modules to the methodology modules, and in between modules on inclusive education, on brain development, on gender mainstreaming, on education for sustainable development linked to sustainable development goals, so that each and every teacher will see the overall picture on the citizens of what world we are creating. So all these modules that we are developing, we aim to open this up to those organizations, those institutions who will be doing teacher professional development, and they can use this because this is going to be outsourced to various organizations, so that they can take the modules and also and teach these modules, adding their professional experience and something that is unique to that given organization. And then when we were going to pilot all of this new curricular developments as well as the teaching and learning materials, and to pilot that, obviously in a pilot region teachers will go through a framework of professional development, and then with your support and with your feedback, also with the feedback of the learners, we will review the curricula, we will review teaching and learning materials, and then try to scale it up to the country. So when I'm saying that we really are very much hinging on your support, I absolutely mean it. And I believe that you can also provide us with your feedback that you will have also from your learners. Oftentimes, the teachers, a teacher, anyone, it could be university teacher, professor, whatever, may think that we know the best what the learner needs, and oftentimes do not listen, not to what the learner has to ask from us, but it's of utmost importance. I'm sure you know about it. So, one thing within this framework that we have seen it's missing is that all of you that are in the teaching profession, at least in Armenia, there is hardly a pathway of where your career is taking yourself to. What is next? Okay, you've been teaching at school, you've developed a career, but what comes next? So for us, it's been of utmost importance to give an opportunity for a teacher career, for the teachers to see where they're heading to. For school graduates, when they are having their career orientation, to know that they have a career, a teacher career development pathway, and that one day maybe they will invent an absolutely new teaching method for, say, English language for foreigners. And to do that, we have identified, and this is, by the way, I am sharing with you the draft version along which lines we're thinking about now. We've had some professional discussions, and I'll be very much interested to know whether you have any feedback on this, because in upcoming months we're going to have more extensive public discussions on how we see. So this is the first experience of sharing this publicly with the professional community, and just to give a little bit of food for thought. So we trust that anyone can become a teacher. If there is a will, there is a way, and this is really powerful when we think about it. So anyone should have the opportunity to get into the teaching profession, teaching career, even if they do not have years of pedagogical education. So we should not deprive the willing ones to get into this career. That's why we have developed a draft version of qualification framework for teacher that also gives the path of the career advancement opportunities. And we trust that there are input requirements and there are responsibilities that are linked to each and every level in this qualification framework. And for now, we see 4 levels. It's the novice teacher, whoever is a graduate from a pedagogical university and wants to start from there, then they can join from the very early stages of this career. And then it moves to proficient teacher, mentor teacher, master teacher. And interestingly enough, the way that we have it designed, at the master teacher level, teacher will be doing more research, more innovation in a career rather than teaching. Teaching is an absolute important must to be. But then if I had to draw a diagram, you'd see that in the beginning, the novice teacher will be doing more teaching, and then the master teacher will be doing more research and innovation in the field, and mentorship and coaching and support to the professional development. And also, we do not want to deprive people like me who have no pedagogical education to enter into a career of teacher, maybe not as a novice teacher, because for novice teacher one has to have the pedagogical education. And by the way, it's very important I think it's important for me to mention that in primary years, the hardest thing for teachers is to get into the primary education. And we trust that the novice teacher should learn prior to joining the primary education. So we think along these lines, and we believe that the teacher attestation and professional development should enable each and every individual willing to become a teacher to move across this system of teacher career. And we have also come up with, I know how well you see this, we have also come up with some draft standards that obviously they, per level, per qualification framework, these standards vary, and the content of a standard varies, but we are thinking along these lines that this should be the framework that each, be it pre-service training or in-service training, although for in-service training I prefer referring to it as adult education system. In this adult education system, we believe that this should go along with this 10 standards, and the depth of each standard depends on the level of the qualification. So to put this in a context, we are now going to have a system of attestation to pilot, first of all, to have this approved after a range of consultations, and then pilot the system. And I should say that you can have, especially British Council, very important input in the assessment tools and in the development of assessment rubrics. And I believe that after these 2 days, there can be an opportunity that once we have the public consultations, you can have, each one of you will express willingness to participate, first of all, and have your valuable input in how we should further polish this qualifications framework and then the standards. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anapiosa. And it sounds like we're finally going to have our dream education system. And I personally, as a lifelong learner, I'm very much looking forward to having one. So thank you for your inspirational ideas. Now, before we go on our first break, we would like to hear from you, the participants of today's conference. Because we have so many interesting guests and speakers today, perhaps you would like to address your questions, maybe suggestions to our guests. We would also would very much appreciate it if you could just share your expectations from today's 2 days conference. Is there anyone who's willing to share their thoughts on this?
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing and putting all these things together. This is a very informative and educating platform that we come together every year. Thank you, British Council, for organizing this. I had actually a question to the Deputy Minister of Education and Culture and Sport and Youth and everything. Sorry about this.
And love and prosperity.
So, Mrs. Anna Pisan, when you were saying novice teachers should learn to become novice teachers, I would actually love to hear your comments on that and how you elaborate that, because to my knowledge, we have teacher training education for pre-service teachers in most of the universities in Armenia, especially in pedagogical university. So how else is the ministry planning to prepare those novice teachers? Because I understand the importance of the primary education in Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you. I joke myself about the name of the ministry, not to embarrass when someone else jokes. So, as to the novice teacher, what I meant when I say that to enter primary education, even a novice teacher has to learn prior to joining the primary education, is that when we were having discussions at the ministry with our staff and with the people who have supported us in the development of the qualifications framework as well as the standards, we've very much discussed that primary education is the foundation for the learning, where the kids learn to learn. And to do that, oftentimes when newly graduates of pedagogical university that we currently have enter into classroom, this can be quite a challenge for newly graduates. So we trust that the newly graduates, we've discussed this for a number of times, and still it's open for comments, obviously. We trust that those who have just graduated, they should be given the opportunity to teach in lower secondary schools. But for teaching at primary education and primary schools, the terms of reference that we're now developing for the teachers per school level, we're thinking of putting some experience requirements so that those who are getting into the primary school should have some teaching experience, since primary education, especially for 6-7 years old, it's a challenge. But this is how we think. Hope I did answer to your question.
I'm sorry. I understand that, but how you're going to do that? This is my question. Is it going to be while they're teaching or before they go into the primary school?
Oh, I see.
So the process, how is it planned to?
It's very simple. We do have pedagogical university that is developing the teacher population in our country. It's a whole different subject how we are thinking that pedagogical university should be, the pedagogical education should be reformed. Probably next year we can have something in between that things as a conference topic. But the simple thing is that teachers are supposed to have, now also teachers have terms of references, meaning there is a requirement that has a governmental decree on the to and experience requirements of teachers. So we intend to put there, to slightly change those requirements, the terms of reference, as we call, and for those who are just graduates, they get into the lower secondary education. And then for those who want to get into primary school, once they have teaching experience in lower secondary education or in upper secondary education, then they can apply for the teacher's position at the primary school.
Thank you very much. I'm sure during the next 2 days, we'll have more opportunities to talk about these topics and share. Everyone will have a chance to share their thoughts on this. Is there anyone who's willing to? Yes.
Thank you. My question is to the PM, the Minister of Education, the Vice PM, Ms. Anna Pearson. Please, I want to ask you about the modules and learning outcomes you have spoken about. And the question is whether you have these learning outcomes for not only universities but at primary and secondary schools, wherein at schools we will have learning outcomes, and whether these learning outcomes gonna be for each school or it's gonna be for every school of Armenia. So I would like to know this more details because I work at academic programs department at Yerevan State Medical University, and as we know, the learning outcomes are different for each institution. And for schools, it's gonna be for each school, or it's just universal for every school? Because it's new thing. As far as I know, for our primary and secondary schools, we do not have learning outcomes and this module system. It's only for higher education system.
Thank you for the question. Thank you. So this is what we have done so far. We have developed the competences that a school graduate should have, that we say whoever gets into the Armenian secondary education system developing, they should have these competences. And these competences, I'm sure you probably know, Council of Europe reference framework for competences and democratic culture. So the compilation of knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, this comprises what we mean when we say competences. So after the graduation of the 12th grade, each and every graduate we aim to give for each and every graduate to have those competences. As to the learning outcomes, so currently we have developed learning outcomes per school level, primary school level, lower secondary and upper secondary. Previously in the national general education curriculum, we didn't have learning outcomes, the one that is still still the one that we're referring to. In this document, we have learning outcomes per subject area. But if we give learning outcomes, we've had discussion in the ministry about this, and there are pros and cons to having per subject area. My thinking is that when we're having per subject area and not per school, we are almost excluding the possibility of interdisciplinarity, because one topic can be a foundational topic for various disciplines. And once we design learning outcomes per disciplines, then we give very little, if at all, opportunity for this interdisciplinarity and interlinkages between disciplines. So that's why we have developed per school level. These learning outcomes are generic enough to give each and every school an opportunity to provide more if they're willing to. But what we did, we first developed the detailed level learning outcomes that we figured out, the team of experts that has been working figured out that this is so much detailed, we better group certain learning outcomes into more generic ones, because the specific learning outcomes will come per syllabi. So this gives an opportunity for, of course we're going to have syllabi also provided, but schools will have an opportunity to enrich this syllabi and to meet their needs of their learners. And once you have the opportunity to read and to study this new document, I hope that you can figure out that there are generic, so that it is for all schools, the learning outcomes per syllabi that are now to be developed. They are more specific, but like I said, in the four level of the curricular hierarchy, the most important thing is what you have in your lesson plan and what you're actually assessing students for. So I trust that the concern that if there is any specialization at high school level or at college level, this is what the concern comes from, I assume, you can have the opportunity, any teacher can have, and a school can have an opportunity to enrich and give this track of specialization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure these are all very pressing questions. Is there anyone who would like to share their expectations from this conference? You have a question? Do we have time?
Maybe I will try to voice it without a microphone. Thank you a lot. This is very, very interesting. But since we also have people who are coming from higher education institutions, it would really be fantastic to learn before seeing any reforms except for low and higher education. Because currently what we have been voicing as far as the CPD is concerned,
We have been having the system of having this kandidatska stuff previously, not any longer than associate professor, then professors, doctors, and this was seen as a kind of a natural path of the CPD. But we also know that when Hayes are being accredited, they mostly score very low when it comes to criterion and standard number 5, whether they provide certain opportunities for the continuous professional development of their teaching staff. So I was wondering whether there will be any changes with this or no. Thank you a lot. Thank you.
So we've been very vocal for the past year about the law on higher education and research, but it's not the reform, it's the framework for the reform, and the framework we need for that would enable us, give us the opportunity to actually implement this. So the major thing that we're doing with this, that the reform will enable us to do, is that we're creating a common one umbrella for higher education institutions and for research institutions. And the concept, the underlying concept, is that currently our educational institutions, higher education institutions, do not meet the quality criteria and the quality standards that we aim for. Also at the European Network for Quality Assurance Agency has reviewed in 2015 the standards and guidelines, the ESG, and we are still not keeping up with that. So the fastest way for raising the quality is by an incorporation of research into the education system. And this is why we have reviewed and considerably rewritten the law, the draft law, to give this opportunity. Your question on the 3 cycles that we were supposed to have once we joined the Bologna system, a straightforward answer is that yes, we are going to have full 3rd cycle. So there is going to be a graduation phase for the existing ones, those who are already in the system of the candidate and then to the doctorate, but this will graduate once the law is enacted, and we will have full 3 cycles, BA, MA, and PhD level, and full stop. And then we will have a complete compliance with the European qualifications framework.
Thank you very much. I think it's break time, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the end of the opening part. We're going to have a short 20 minutes break, and we expect you all to be here back at 11:40 sharp. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed your short break. And now, allow me to introduce our guest speaker today, Mr. Stephen Eingold. Brief introduction, if you don't mind. Stephen is originally from Ware in the south of England and has been working in ELT for over 30 years. During this time, he's worked as a teacher, teacher educator, and materials writer. At the moment, he is based in Zagreb in Croatia, where he works as a freelancer. His experience as a teacher educator with the British Council has taken him to a number of countries in the wider Eastern Europe, in Eastern regions, including Albania, Georgia, Israel, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Serbia, and Ukraine, where he has trained teachers in areas including learning technologies, content and language integrated learning, assessment, and special educational needs. He is also the co-author of a number of textbooks used in the Croatian secondary school system. Mr. Stephen Heinkel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosanne. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's amazing to see that so many people have given up their Saturday mornings to be here. First of all, I'd like to thank the British Council for inviting me here to Yerevan. This is the first time that I've actually been here, and I hope that I'll have a chance to look around the city and to get to know it better. So I'm going to talk to you today about CPD. And when Ade first invited me to talk about this, it was back in the summer, and I was in Britain visiting family and friends, and many of my friends, like myself, are teachers. And so I met up with one of my friends, and I said, I'm going to Armenia to do a talk on CPD. And he goes, oh yeah, all right then. And so we started to talk about it, and he had some quite interesting observations for me. First of all, he told me this simply amazing fact about the amount of money that is spent on CPD in England every year. Right, get ready for this. £200 million. That's a lot of money in any country, £200 million. That's not for the United Kingdom, that's not for Great Britain, that's just for England. And I said, oh wow, and I sort of felt quite proud to think that my home country was investing so much money in CPD. And then he said, but the catch is that in his opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of teachers, it was not money well spent. And he had lots of anecdotal evidence of teachers going away, attending seminars, attending workshops, and coming back with very little benefit. Sorry about that. I feel a bit like a spaceman with all of these wires. So anyway, £200 million, and it seems that not a lot of it is being particularly well spent if teachers are going away on seminars and coming back and not really having any concrete benefit from it, because there was no sort of evidence in the classroom that there was any improvement in the teacher outcomes and in the learner outcomes. And he actually believed that sometimes teachers come back not with more learning, but they can actually be weaker because they haven't fully grasped the principles that were involved in the CPD courses that they went on, and that they were misapplying them in their lessons. So this is really quite a worrying state of affairs, and it got me thinking a bit more about why I'll keep going. As you've probably seen, I've never used one of these things before. Anyway, it seems that when it comes to CPD, that we take a lot of things for granted. Just because we provide CPD opportunities, it doesn't mean automatically that teachers are going to benefit from them. because there are many formidable obstacles in the way of any effective CPD. We can't just introduce programs and say, oh, this is fine now, we have a program in place, so therefore our teachers automatically will improve the way in which they teach. It just doesn't work like that. And CPD needs to be effective. So first of all, what I want to do is to look honestly at some of the obstacles that face teachers and which face institutions when it comes to CPD. Okay, here are our obstacles. Now the first one, let's be really honest. Let's be really honest about this. Teachers have a lot to do. Besides the contact hours that you have every day, you also have to prepare those lessons. And I remember, when I was a newly qualified teacher, preparing lessons, drawing up lesson plans was an incredibly time-consuming task. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of energy, it took a lot of resources. And then, on top of that, there is the work that is generated during the actual teaching process. So principally here, I'm talking about marking and assessment. And a lot of my colleagues and friends in Britain who are teachers constantly complain about the amount of marking that they have to do. You know, they say that basically weekends are often devoted to marking. And then, on top of the preparation, on top of the teaching, on top of the marking, there are a whole series of administrative tasks which need to be undertaken by teachers in schools, completing registers, compiling reports. It goes on. And if we're going to be honest about CPD, we're going to have to say that institutions need to make time for CPD, because all of the workload that I've spoken about only refers to the professional lives of teachers, but teachers also have personal lives. Teachers are, mothers and husbands and fathers, brothers and sisters, etc. They have their own personal lives that they need to live as well. So, any frank conversation about CPD needs to take into account that teachers already have a heavy workload, and if we're going to be honest about it, we need to make time for CPD. Now, when we're talking about the development of teachers and about teachers learning, then there are tremendous similarities with any other kind of learning. So, for instance, learning a language. And I think that nearly every teacher would say that when it comes to learning a language, the key thing is motivation. But if you don't have motivation, it's going to be very difficult for you to learn effectively. And if teachers are going to develop effectively and to be able to teach better so that learners can learn better, then they have to be motivated as well. And again, institutions need to look at the levels of teacher motivation. Besides the workload, of course, many teachers have to work in quite challenging circumstances. I'm based in Croatia, and in the capital city Zagreb, it is not uncommon for teachers to have to teach classes of 38 pupils. My colleagues in Britain, particularly in London, complain about the challenging behaviour of many of the students in their classes. And finally, there's the question which won't go away, which is of pay. And at the moment in Croatia, I was just talking to Simon that many of my colleagues in secondary schools are actually on strike at the moment because the salary of teachers in Croatia is below the national average. So in a situation where teachers have to teach very large classes, there can be bad behaviour, and they're not being paid very much, it's very challenging for them to undertake CPD. And we have to be frank about this, that if we're going to get teachers to develop, we need to make sure that they're motivated, because motivation is really the key when it comes to any form of learning. Okay, I've already touched upon the money, but it's not as straightforward as you might think, because money pervades everything when it comes to CPD. So, for instance, if we're going to send a bunch of teachers on a course, some people have to teach their class while they're away. Arranging cover costs money. Even something like peer observation programs. One person is teaching, the other person is observing, but who's teaching the observer's class? Again, it needs cover, it needs money. Organising courses, bringing in consultants, giving people access to online courses, it all costs money. And resources as well. We live in a world in which our CPD landscape is radically changing all the time. Teachers have never had such opportunities to access content online, etc. But again, providing this access in certain places where maybe not everybody has access to the internet, or there aren't enough laptops, etc. in the classroom, it all costs money. So, before we even start our CPD, we have to realise that we are confronted with these formidable obstacles of the workload, the motivation, and this question of money. But it doesn't end there, of course. There are further obstacles. Planning. Now, obviously planning should assist CPD, but unfortunately a lot of the evidence suggests that when planning goes wrong, CPD goes really wrong. I'd like to share an anecdote with you about Britain. I was told by a colleague about an institution which had arranged some CPD for newly and recently qualified teachers. Great. Who needs CPD more than recently and newly qualified teachers? And it was specifically targeted at them, so that's great too. And when did they have this course? At the end of the school year, which meant that the teachers had to go all the way through the year before they actually got that input that was specifically designed for them. I mean, obviously it should have come at the beginning. I mean, this is, we have this saying in English about the horse has left the stable and then you close the door afterwards. That's a classic example of that particular idiom. So planning, or poor planning, again, can hinder professional development among teachers. And lastly, there is this question of opportunities. Opportunities for teachers are not even across any kind of society. And in some societies, it can be really challenging for teachers to even access CPD opportunities. So as I said, I'm based in Croatia, and Croatia has a rather coastline, and as anybody from Croatia is always keen to tell you, it has more than 1,000 islands, and about 100 of these islands are actually populated, and many of them are sufficiently populated as to have schools, etc. And on one occasion I was involved in a CPD event in the city of Dubrovnik, right in the south. You might have seen it on television. I gather it was used as the location for the series Game of Thrones. But anyway, Dubrovnik, and I got talking to one of the teachers, and I said, where do you come from? And she told me that she came from one of these islands, and it had taken her 5 hours just to reach the location of the event. So she'd had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't even know why she bothered going to bed, to be honest. 3 o'clock in the morning to catch a bus to the port on that island, and then catch a ferry across the Adriatic to Dubrovnik, take part in the CPD opportunity, and then go back another 5 hours. So a 10-hour round journey on a Saturday. No teacher Nobody should have to undertake that kind of journey to undertake a professional development opportunity. And of course, this is going to be a real problem in countries where you have isolated communities in rural areas. So just physical distance itself can be a huge obstacle when it comes to CPD. And these opportunities are not just geographical. In my experience, it's been quite sad sometimes to see how in a certain institution the same teachers get selected for the same opportunities again and again, which of course is going to be very demotivating for those people who are overlooked. So what often happens is particular teachers, they go off, receive face-to-face training, and they come back and they cascade that training to the other teachers. Now, of course, that's a useful CPD activity, particularly for the people doing the cascading. But it's going to be less motivating if you're always one of the people who has to stay behind and never gets the opportunities. So, before we even start looking at CPD, we really need to acknowledge that there are formidable obstacles. And that we can't just take it for granted that CPD will just happen because we set up some courses, etc. What I want to talk about now is what we can actually do to make sure that CPD is effective. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is a blindingly obvious thing, but we need to think about it a bit, and that is effective CPD needs to be a priority. And I think that one of the problems is that in many institutions that I've had the experience of working for or with, is that what we would call lip service is paid to this, which means that everybody goes, yeah, CPD, great idea, of course. And so a certain number of CPD hours is organised. So, for example, in Britain, teachers are supposed to undertake 30 hours of CPD in an academic year, and a certain amount of money needs to be spent. But what the danger is that it becomes an administrative task, an exercise in ticking boxes to say, okay, we've got to observe so many teachers. Okay, we've observed that one, tick, we've observed that one, tick, etc. Okay, we've got to spend X amount of money. And at the end we can say, okay, we've met our CPD goals because we spent that amount of money. And so there can be too much focus on the quantitative aspect of it and not enough on the qualitative aspect. So if we're going to be really serious about this, we've got to make it a priority. And we're not just talking about making it a priority from the point of view of institutions. We, as teachers, need to take responsibility for our own development. I know that things like diplomas and certificates are very important and that they can be a source of motivation in themselves, but sometimes it can be quite disappointing when it seems that all that teachers want is that proof of attendance so that they can fulfill administrative requirement. Effective CPD needs to be a priority. Now, I said that any kind of teacher learning is going to be like learner learning. And I think everybody in this room would agree that if you want to teach a learner effectively, you need to find out about the learner's needs in the first place. And effective CPD cannot be a one-size-fits-all, because teachers are different. I mean, we have sort of very obvious and basic differences. Kindergarten teachers, primary school teachers, secondary school teachers, university teachers. And then within, say, secondary education, there might be different specialities. We might have teachers who teach CLIL, so content and language integrated learning. Teachers might be preparing pupils with English for academic purposes. They might be preparing pupils for exams, etc. The list goes on and on. Teachers are different. They have different needs. And even within a particular cohort of teachers, you will have newly qualified teachers, recently qualified teachers, and teachers with varying levels of experience. So it just doesn't make sense to give them training for all of them, or professional development opportunities for all of them. We need to look at their specific needs in exactly the same way that we would look at the specific needs of pupils in our classes. And I'd like to talk a little bit about an experience that I had doing this in neighbouring Georgia, in Tbilisi, where there was a private language school which had decided that it wanted to radically alter the way in which English was taught in its curriculum. And so it provided a questionnaire for the teachers to complete, because obviously one of the best ways of finding out about teachers' needs is to ask them themselves. And of course this is good practice, because a lot of research suggests that when teachers are engaged in their own professional development, they become more motivated, in exactly the same way that learners become more motivated when they're engaged in drawing up their own learning. So these questionnaires were distributed, and the teachers completed them and returned them. And the results were quite surprising. I almost had this feeling that the teachers had completed it for an audience rather than for themselves, because the teachers, when asked what they felt they needed to improve most, they all said, grammar. I need to improve the way that I teach grammar, because I need to make sure that my learners can speak more accurately and can write more accurately. I need input on correcting their mistakes. So there was very much this focus on grammar and accuracy. Okay, fair enough. But the institution had provided a similar questionnaire to the learners as well, which was even more enlightening, because they asked this question, what do you think you need to work on more in your English lessons, and why do you need English? And all of these students, of course, nearly all of them, they said, well, I want to access higher education opportunities in English, in universities and colleges where the language of instruction is English, so I need to be able to communicate in English. And they said, I want to work in a multinational company, I want to work in a bank, so it's really important that I have the opportunity to improve my English speaking skills and my presentation skills so that I can access this. They spoke about travel, they spoke about leisure, about the fact that so much of social media these days is conducted in English. And so basically what they wanted was to be able to communicate more, to have the opportunity to speak more in the classes. And when they were asked, what do you do least of in your lessons, they said, speaking. And then, of course, we had another dimension when it came to addressing the needs of the teachers, which was observation, to actually go into the classes and see what was going on. And there very much was a focus on grammar translation methodology. And I saw a class in which a teacher stood up and basically lectured everybody for 45 minutes on, I'll always remember it, the past continuous, with lots of examples, etc. And the pupils sat there and they took notes. Now, obviously, in any situation when you just listen to somebody the whole time, I'm arguing against myself now because I'm getting you to listen to me, it can be, it's a bit repetitive and it's a bit demotivating. So based on the questionnaire which had been given to the teachers, the questionnaire which had been given to the learners, and on the observations carried out, we could define what the needs of this particular group of teachers was, and it was that they needed to improve their skills in communicative language teaching. And so in any situation, because teachers are different, we need to identify their needs. And then, as a knock-on effect, any CPD needs to be tailored. It needs to be devised specifically for that group of teachers, and preferably for individual teachers themselves, because the difference amongst teachers doesn't just apply to groups like newly qualified teachers or CLIL teachers, etc. Amongst individuals, there will be different strengths, and there will be different areas in need of development. So ideally, CPD needs to be tailored So what we're talking about here, of course, is things like classroom observation is obviously a very tailored CPD opportunity because it refers to the experience of an individual teacher. Ideally, teachers should be drawing up their own CPD plans related to their own strengths and their own areas for development. So again, very specifically tailored to the developmental needs of the teachers themselves. Of course, it can be applied a bit more widely, and that we can tailor activities for a group of teachers. But it seems to me, and also I have to admit that I've been involved in such activities, that a problem with a lot of CPD is that it's just provided for too wide an audience. And when it's provided for too wide an audience, then the impact is going to be limited because it's not tailored enough. So, and often this is because it's sort of like delivered before anything else has happened. So before any observation has happened, for instance. So it makes more sense to decide what kind of workshops, what kind of online courses teachers need after there's been some kind of initial activities like observation. So getting back to my example of Tbilisi, in that case, working with the teachers, observing them, getting them to draw up individual plans, it quickly became apparent that one of the areas in which they needed some kind of input was on giving feedback to learners. So this seemed to be something which was applicable to all of them, and so we were able to give them a workshop on that. So it was something very specific, giving feedback to learners. Unfortunately, a lot of workshops are very sort of generic, things like writing skills, speaking skills, and of course these do have benefits, but the benefits are probably not going to be as great as something which is very specifically tailored to the needs of the teachers. And of course we mustn't forget all of the most important people in this story, the learners themselves. For any kind of CPD, obviously we want to improve the outcomes for teachers so that we can see that teachers are teaching better, but we want to see that learners are learning better, because at the end of the day, that is the most important thing. Are learners improving their performance? Are they able to do things that they weren't able to do at the beginning? So what we have here is it's like a knock-on effect. By addressing the needs of the teachers, tailoring the CPD to those needs, and tailoring it to the desired outcomes. Because it's an awful lot of money that's being spent. So getting back to the example of Britain, or England rather, £200 million. And if a lot of that money doesn't even produce any learner outcomes, well, that money could be spent on something else. How many schools could you build with that money? How many teachers could you employ with that money? How many hospitals could you employ with that money? So, it's a duty to make sure that this money is well spent, and that means that we need to see positive learner outcomes. CPD needs to revolve around the classroom. If your CPD policy isn't classroom-based, then it should be. Because any amount of theoretical knowledge, any amount of reading, any amount of attending talks like this cannot compensate for actually being in the classroom, because it's in the classroom where we really learn. If you talk to newly qualified teachers, one of the things they talk about is classroom shock. And classroom shock is the phenomenon of, you go through all of your lectures and you do all of your team practice and, you do a lot of reading, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're in the classroom. And it doesn't matter how much reading you've done, how many lectures you've attended, it's a completely different universe. And one of the previous speakers was talking about how complex teaching is. And I think that's a really good way of describing it. Nothing can prepare you for the complexity of being in the classroom. And, classroom shock is a real issue. and therefore any kind of CPD really needs to revolve around the classroom. So what does that mean? That means activities like observation. Now, when we talk about observation, we've got different kinds of observation. It can be peer observation, it can be hierarchical, where maybe a mentor is observing a mentee. It can be flipped, so that a mentee can be observing a more experienced practitioner so that they can learn from them. But also when we say that something is classroom-based, it doesn't have to be like a physical classroom. We don't actually have to physically be in the classroom, because these days technology offers us all sorts of wonderful opportunities. We can spend a lot of time looking at videos, for example. We can video ourselves teaching. We can see videos of our colleagues teaching. But also, when we say classroom-based, this also applies to things just like reflecting on what goes on in the classroom. So later today, Simon's going to talk to you about teacher activity groups, and I've worked with some teacher educators here in Armenia who've helped to set up these groups. And one of the great things about teacher activity groups is that teachers have the opportunity to discuss an idea, to go back to their classrooms and carry it out, and then go back to their tag group and to discuss how it went, and then refine things according to what needs to be changed, and go back and do it all again. So again, it's classroom based. Any kind of individual plan for teacher development should be based on what goes on in the classroom. The plan should be modified, refined, according to the experience of what went on in the classroom. So nothing replaces classroom experience. Nothing replaces classroom-based CPD. Workshops are useful, articles are useful, all of these online resources are useful, but nothing is as useful as actually being there in the classroom. CPD needs to be driven by feedback. Teachers need to be informed about how they are performing. First of all, they need to be reinforced in their good practice. So when teachers do things well, they need to be told that they're doing them well, but also they need to be told why they're doing them well. Because sometimes we can actually do things well, but we might not even realise why we're doing it well and why it's important. I understand that Penny came to speak to you here a couple of years ago, and that she has this phrase which I really like, where she talks about being an automatician. And I think that can always be a danger with a teacher, that we know that we should do something, so we do it, but we don't really know why we're doing it, or we stopped, or we've forgotten why we should be doing it. So it's really important to give teachers feedback on what they're doing well. And of course, just as importantly, it's really important to give teachers feedback on areas that they need to develop. Now, if Roseanne's still here, I apologise, I think she's already heard this particular anecdote. But when I think about the worst piece of feedback that I ever received in my life, we'd have to go back to the 1980s, and when I was a recently qualified teacher, and I was working at a private language school, a very large one in the centre of London, right bang in the middle of Oxford Street. And it was the policy of this school, to carry out observations of teachers, and I vividly remember the vice DOS, or vice director of studies, running around the school trying to observe as many teachers as possible in a very short period of time. And I remember him coming into my room. I was bitterly disappointed because I didn't even have the opportunity to discuss my lesson plan with him. Which of course should be an important part of any observation process. And he sat there and he seemed to make a few notes, and then as soon as my lesson was finished, he was straight out of the door. And I had to spend the next couple of days running around the school trying to grab him by the collar and saying, "Oh, can I have some feedback, please?" And he went, when I finally cornered him, he said, yeah, basically it was fine. You can imagine my deflation. Like at first there was this kind of relief, because I thought, oh wow, he's not going to tear me to pieces. But then when I thought about it, I thought, what did I get out of that? Of all of the worry, the preparation and everything, I got nothing. In actual fact, I got even less than nothing, because he said basically. So, yeah, basically, well, what about the other stuff? Yeah? So, feedback obviously needs to be principled, so it needs to be constructive, it needs to tell people what they're doing well, but it also needs to give people areas for development. And that CPD without feedback on how you're doing isn't any kind of development at all. So effective CPD needs to revolve around the classroom and be driven by feedback on how we are doing things. It's called CPD. It's not PD, it's CPD. So there's the continuing aspect, which means that effective CPD needs to be followed up. So in my example of being a young teacher in the 1980s in London, there was absolutely no follow-up whatsoever. All the boxes had been ticked, he'd observed the number of teachers that he needed to observe, and that was it. There was nothing afterwards. See, one of the problems with a lot of CPD is that it exists in isolation. So you go on a course, and then you finish it, and there's no follow-up. Or you're observed, and that's it for the semester, or the term, or the year, or whatever. There's no follow-up. In order to be effective, you need to see what happens afterwards, because it's an ongoing process, because learning is an ongoing process. So if we draw another analogy with the classroom, you wouldn't go into a class and teach a specific structure or certain lexical item. I don't know, say we're going to teach the past perfect. You wouldn't teach it to a class and then afterwards come back in and expect everybody in that class to know that structure and to be able to use that structure. No, you need to follow it up. Yeah? So you need to review it in the next lesson. You need to recycle it. People need to have more opportunities to work with it. And it's exactly the same with CPD for teachers. You can't just introduce an idea to teachers and expect that they can go from the training room or from online immediately into their classroom and to be able to use those ideas. It needs to be followed up. So, in an observation situation, the teacher's CPD plan needs to be changed according to the feedback that they've received in that observation, and then the next observation session should somehow be connected and linked with the previous one. So we have this element of continuity so that it's sustained. Similarly, if somebody goes on a course, we want to see some evidence that the course has been of some use, the workshop has been of some use. So, teachers need to reflect upon whether or not they've been able to use that experience. Observations should maybe be linked with whether or not that particular course was any use. Is there any evidence in the classroom? So, we need to make sure that we keep the C in CPD, that it is continuing, that it is followed up, and that it is sustained. Because learning experiences do not occur in individual items, it's part of a continuity. And learning to teach or improving as a teacher is exactly the same. And then at the end of this, we need to evaluate the whole process. Have we actually learned anything? Have our learners actually learnt anything? Have we become better teachers? Have our learners become better at learning the language? Has this money that we've spent been well spent? Has this time and effort that we've put into this, has it been worth it? Now obviously teachers themselves can evaluate their own CPD. Yeah? This is why reflection is so important. Did I gain anything out of today? Did I gain anything from that workshop? But also institutions have a responsibility here. If they're spending all of that money, they need to make sure that their teachers are providing better teaching. They need to make sure that their learners are learning more and more quickly. And if that's not happening, then obviously things need to change. The CPD policy needs to be adjusted. Maybe we need more of this and less of this. Maybe we need to change our CPD provider. So if we have some kind of an external consultant who's coming in and we're not getting any results, maybe we need to change it. The point is, it needs to be evaluated, because if it isn't, then why are we undertaking it in the first place? So, effective CPD revolves around the classroom, driven by feedback, it's sustained, it's ongoing, and it's evaluated, not just at the end, but periodically. Okay, this is my last 4. I keep drawing these analogies with the classroom experience, and I think that this is a really important thing to hold on to. Yeah? Learning to become a better teacher is very similar to learning to become a better speaker of a language. Now, research shows that people are more motivated in learning when they have an opportunity to share their experiences, when they have the opportunity to work together. And that is why so much work in the language classroom revolves around collaboration, so that we have pair work and group work and mingles and circle discussions and onion discussions and all of these weird and wonderful collaborative activities. And what's good for learners is also good for teachers, because when it comes to developing as teachers, sometimes it can be a bit lonely. I'm a big football fan, and this provides me with an excellent opportunity to digress momentarily into football. You know the French writer Camus, the guy who wrote L'Étrangère? He had this great thing about the goalkeeper being the loneliest position on the football field, because the goalkeeper is in a team, but somehow they are different from everybody else. And I think that teachers are in a similar position, because the teacher is always with other people, but somehow the teacher is alone because in the classroom, because you don't have your colleagues with you in the classroom, generally speaking. And so that's why it's even more important to engage in collaborative activities with colleagues outside of the classroom. So things like peer teaching, team teaching, peer observation, and these teacher activity groups, which Simon is going to talk to you about. The opportunity to come together and exchange knowledge, practices, advice, all kinds of tips. Now, formal structures for collaborative CPD are excellent, of course, so teacher activity groups, peer observation, etc. But an awful lot of effective CPD at the collaborative level takes place in what you're doing now. Just having the opportunity to talk to the people next to you, in front of you and behind you, in the coffee break, etc. But one of the greatest benefits you will get from an occasion like this is the opportunity to talk to each other. Because, I mean, let's face it, you're listening to me, but what do I know about your context? I've never been into your classroom. I've never had to work with any of the textbooks that you work with. I've never had to work with the pupils that you work with and face the difficulties that you face every day. But there are people in this room who have done that and who have a lot of experience and who will be able to give you some practical advice. So this is, when we talk about collaborative CPD, we're not just talking about it at the formal level, but also at the informal level. Okay? And not just physically, but also, IT these days has opened up a world of opportunities to us. You can post questions on forums and get replies almost instantly. Although this, of course, carries its own danger, because there is so much information out there that we have to evaluate to what extent it is useful or not. But if something is collaborative, it's going to be more purposeful. I've already mentioned this, but effective CPD really needs to be reflective. We've got to stop, it's really important not to be an automatician, to just go into the classroom and to carry out the lesson and then to come back out again without thinking about what we've done. Was it, to a certain extent, most teachers will do this, was the lesson successful? Was the lesson less successful? But it's really important to ask why. Yeah? And so if it wasn't so successful, why wasn't it successful? And most importantly, what can I do to improve it next time? And really, reflection shouldn't just be about after the lesson. Reflection should even be before the lesson. When I was looking through the programme, I saw that there's a session on lesson planning. And when we draw up our lesson plans, there should always be this section about anticipated problems. You know, what kind of problems might occur in my lesson? And part of that, if we're going to reflect on it and not just be an automatician, we actually need to come up with solutions. Yeah? So these are the potential problems in my lesson, but what are my potential solutions to that going to be? So reflection needs to be going right the way through the process, even before we go into the classroom, while we're teaching, and particularly afterwards. Now, reflection has obviously become a real buzzword in CPD, and we talk about it all the time, reflection this, reflection that. But in actual fact, teachers need a lot of guidance on this. It's not just, you can't just tell somebody, go away and reflect. People actually need to be taught how to reflect. They might need some, templates, guidelines, etc. So CPD should really be focusing on not just giving teachers the skills for the classroom, but also on giving teachers the skills for outside of the classroom, for before the lesson and for after the lesson as well. And this is another great thing about TAG groups or teacher activity groups, because it gives teachers the opportunity to come together, to try something out, and then to reflect upon it, not just on their own, but to reflect on it with other teachers. Because it's easier to reflect on something with other people than to just reflect on it on your own, because you can bounce ideas off of people, you can get confirmation from your peers that what you thought wasn't a silly idea, it was a good idea, etc. So we need to drive CPD through reflection. Reflection needs to become normed. It needs to be something normal for teachers, but teachers need a lot of support in developing this. We need balance in CPD, just as we need balance when we teach. We talked about the importance of motivation, and most people would agree that when it comes to motivating language learners, one of the most important things is providing variety. So if you just sit and listen to somebody, so I'm arguing against myself again here. If you just listen to somebody all of the time, it's going to be demotivating because it's very repetitive. And I'm sure you'll be very glad that you only have to go through this for 60 minutes and not again and again and next Monday. Yeah? So what's important is variety. So my grandmother she was always fond of saying, variety is the spice of life. And when we teach, of course, we want to have as much variety as possible. So even like when we do a speaking activity, if you only did it in pairs, always, it would become boring, which is why we have other patterns of interaction like mingles and group work, etc. But of course, you don't want to just do speaking in the lesson. You need to do a bit of writing, a bit of work with vocabulary, some reading and some listening. So you need balance. And it's absolutely the same with teachers. Teachers can't just attend lectures. Teachers can't just attend workshops. Teachers can't just read stuff online or read articles or engage in observation, etc. So any good CPD program needs to achieve this balance of activities so that it remains motivating for teachers. But when we talk about balance, we're not just talking about the kinds of activities that teachers do. Sometimes CPD will be driven in a top-down manner. In other words, that it's going to be determined on a hierarchical basis by ministries, by institutions, and then it's mandated to teachers. And of course, that's as it should be. But also, for the sake of balance, besides top-down, we also need to have bottom-up teacher development. So that means that we, as teachers, as professionals, we need to take responsibility for our own learning and not just leave it in the hands of institutions and in the hands of ministries. We need to think, what can I do to become a better teacher so that my learners can learn more effectively? Some CPD opportunities can be conducted alone, some can be conducted in groups, face-to-face, online. Sometimes we will get people from outside, we will get external experts. Sometimes we ourselves can provide that knowledge, because at the end of the day, nobody knows our context, or nobody knows your context better than you do yourself. So throughout any kind of CPD program, it's really important to have balance in order to maintain motivation. This is my last point now. As part of taking responsibility for our own CPD, we need to step outside of the comfort zone every now and again. Now, I know I've been in that situation when I've been observed, for example, or when I've been asked to lead an activity in a teacher development session. And one of the problems can be, like by default, we go back to something that's safe. I vividly remember being observed by a senior colleague, and I'm making the decision like, okay, it's really important that nothing goes wrong in this lesson. So I did a review lesson because I thought, well, the learners are going to know the material better, they're not going to let me down. The lesson's going to go more smoothly. I'm just going to do those activities that I always do because I know that they always work. Yeah? But really, when I reflected on it afterwards, what did I get from it? Nothing. I was kidding myself. Yeah? I wasn't actually prioritising my CPD. I was just engaged in this administrative burden of just like ticking the box. Yes, I've been observed, that's it for a few weeks, that's out of the way. But in actual fact, what had happened was a bit of a tragedy at that kind of CPD level, because I'd had a great opportunity to develop, to try something new, and to get some feedback from a more experienced colleague on how it went, and I missed that opportunity. And now when I have the privilege of going into so many classrooms and observing lots of teachers and going through their lesson plans with them, I do notice this as a common feature, that it's normal to be scared a bit when someone comes into our classroom. This is why it's so important to make it normal. Yeah, so that it's something that doesn't scare us, and so that we don't just go back into our comfort zone and do the things that we know that we can do. Because it's only by trying out new things that we actually get any development. Even working with experienced teacher educators on courses where we have this thing called micro-training or micro-teaching, where the participants on the course have to teach part of a lesson to the other participants. And after a while I realised that not everyone, that's a bit unfair, that a lot of participants, they always choose the same part of the lesson. It's the beginning, a warmer, because warmers are pretty straightforward to deal with, really. So you see lots of activities where they carry out a brainstorming activity and put it on the board, or an activity where they organise people into pairs. So sort of quite mechanical things that they're experienced teachers, so I know that they can do those kinds of things. So to round up, we shouldn't take CPD for granted. CPD is not just going to happen because somebody says it's going to happen, because the school says it's going to happen, or because you decide that you're going to concentrate on it. Because there are formidable barriers to it. We've talked about things like workload, motivation, etc. So it's important that we don't just pay lip service to CPD. We need to think about it. We need to make sure that it's effective. So that means things like making sure that it's connected with people's needs. making sure that it's followed up, making sure that it's connected with learner outcomes, that it's driven by feedback, that it revolves around the classroom, and really importantly, that it has the C aspect of CPD, that it's continuing, that it's sustained. And then at the end, that we evaluate it to see, have we been successful? Is there any evidence that we've improved as teachers? And most importantly, more importantly, that our learners have improved. CPD will be more effective if we do it with other professionals. We need to think about what we're doing, not to be an automatician. Make sure that it's balanced, a nice variety. And we need to take responsibility for it ourselves. The only way that we're going to improve as teachers is to actually do new things. If they don't work, they don't work. Refine it, change it, go back, do it again. So to step outside of the comfort zone and take responsibility for our own CPD in our hands, because at the end of the day, that's really the most that we can ask of teachers. Thank you very much. You've got a well-earned opportunity for some informal CPD amongst yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, for the thought-provoking talk. I think you. This was really interesting because you gave two sides of the same story, and I think many of us really relate to the obstacles which you encountered for the CPD. But at the same time, you provided us with a very nice checklist, which probably we can use when the Ministry of Education is going to ask you to have public discussion on the framework which they're developing, so we can see how many of these speeches are being ticked in terms of being an effective CPD. Thank you so much for that. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being in this session. So it's the end of it. A couple of administrative stuff to make sure that we are keeping the house. So we're now going to have a 55-minute lunch break.
going to have fewer participants now, so can I possibly ask you to come forward, and we have a closer group over here, if you don't mind. Thank you. All right. Okay. Just introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I would like to introduce our next speaker now, Mr. Simon Etherton. Simon Etherton is the head of English for the British Council in the wider Europe region. He has been engaged in teaching and teacher education for over 30 years in contexts as diverse as Ukraine, India, Oman, Europe, and the South Pacific. Specific areas of professional interest include teacher knowledge, practitioner research, and initial literacy development. Mr. Etherton.
Thank you very much. I've been told it's better to stand on this side, and I shouldn't stand under the speaker. So if it looks like I'm like a caged animal, then you can blame the microphone for that. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, and congratulations to you all. You are the honorary medalists for still being here, which is great. Well done. It's been a long day, but I hope you feel that it's been an interesting day. I think that we've covered a theme today, and the conference has its theme, and I think that, of course, I have the disadvantage of coming last, in the sense that you're all a bit tired, and I'll do my best to liven you up a bit. But also a lot of the ideas that we're talking about through the day, I'm going to be talking about again today, but I'll try and do it in a reinforcing way rather than a repetitive way, maybe. So I would like to talk to you today about professional development through action and reflection. That's the title of the talk. And really it's about continuing professional development. And it's about the sort of things that Stephen was talking about this morning, what makes effective continuing professional development, but also what can we do in terms of our approach to teacher development that makes it more effective. And I'll be presenting to you today the idea of a teacher activity group that we've been piloting in many countries around the world, but which we have also been piloting here in Armenia as well. And I think that it's findings from these pilots that we're conducting and the projects we're conducting worldwide have shown that this is really a very effective model. And I hope that I'll be able to convince you of its validity today. I'd like to begin, if I can press the right button, and talk about John Dewey. We've already seen John Dewey today. Do you remember where? Super. Not only do we remember where, but we remember what he said. John Dewey, of course, an American libertarian. I mean, he's a great he was writing most of his key ideas at the turn of the previous century. So 1890 something, he was writing a book about his pedagogical creed, which was 1897, I think. And then in 1902, he sort of launched the idea of learner-centeredness and child-centeredness through his book on child in the curriculum. That's 1902, just to picture when that was. And he was mainly active in the early part of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century. Actually died in 1950. But he's seen not just as a great educationalist, but he's also the guru of reflective practice. So really, he was the first person who really thought through teachers and teaching and reflective practice. And one of the things that he did lots and lots of things, but one of the things he did was he looked at the, what he called, I think, the disposition of teachers. And we talked in this recent online conference that we've just looked about, which the presenter was presenting about the idea of CPPD, with the extra P being personal. Yeah, and John Dewey focused on that as well, and he was saying that, you know, it's not enough just to have the practice, but you also have to have the right sort of personality, the right attitude, the right disposition. And he identified 3 characteristics, actually he identified 4, but anyway, he identified 3 main characteristics of an effective teacher. And I always, these 3 characteristics I think are the creed to me, because the first one is about the idea of openness. So an effective teacher has to be open to new ideas. Think through the opposite of that. What's the opposite of that? It's a closed teacher. Happy with her technique, happy with her classroom routines, happy with the way that she conducts feedback, happy with the way that she asks questions, happy with her routine. She's very closed. An open teacher, on the other hand, is constantly questioning what she does. You know, is there a better way? Maybe I should ask some colleagues. Maybe I should read something. Maybe I should think through. Maybe I should just look at my students. Maybe I should ask my students. You know, is there a better way for all of these sort of routines that we go through? And I think Stephen talked about our automated, I can't remember what you said. Yes, it's like our routines in the classroom are sort of very much automated. So openness is the first one. And do you agree that openness is a useful characteristic? Are you open, do you think? Very open? Okay. All right. So I suppose you can judge how open you are by how many new things you've tried out in your classrooms recently. So that maybe is an idea. Or how many new things you've thought about or considered. Or think about some of the discussions you've had with your colleagues. And think about, you know, have they been about new ideas, new ways of doing things? And how did you receive those? Did you say, yeah, I'm happy with how I do things? Or were you like, that's interesting. How can that work for me? So that's one, openness. The second one, responsibility. Now, this is actually a really interesting one. Because, you know, we are teachers. And, you know, as the Deputy Minister was telling us today, we are crucial, not just for the lives of the young people who come through our classrooms, but we're actually crucial for the overall development of our country. Because in our hands, if you like, are all the aspirations of families, parents, grandparents, communities, and the country itself. And I think an effective teacher understands and feels that responsibility. So whenever she's sitting late at night, planning a lesson or doing some marking, there's a reason for that. When she puts in some extra time to sort of find some interesting resources for the classroom, there's a reason for that. It's that feeling of responsibility. It's whenever she talks to parents and they come in and say, how is my child doing? That's the feeling. That's why I'm doing all of this. So that sense of responsibility, I think, is absolutely key. And again, if you look at the opposite of that, a teacher who is not responsible, does her job, perhaps doesn't put in a bit of extra effort, doesn't really care whether her students get good or bad marks, and so on. So you can see how it can work. But I suppose that then the question is, okay, we don't have very irresponsible teachers like that, but how responsible do you feel? Do you wake up in the morning worrying about that responsibility? Because I would argue perhaps we should. And that's the second one. And the third one is my favorite one, which is wholeheartedness. And I love the sound of that anyway, because it's wholeheartedness. It kind of sounds like you're sighing and sort of giving everything. Wholeheartedness. Sounds lovely. So wholeheartedness is really about putting everything that you have into your job. And we know when we think about effective teachers, they're the ones who are wholehearted in everything that they do. The way that they interact with the children, the enthusiasm they bring into their classroom, the enthusiasm they have or the energy they have for their lesson and so on. So that idea of wholeheartedness is another sort of characteristic of an effective teacher. So what do you think? Do you think these are three interesting ideas? Yeah? Do you disagree with them? Would you like to add another one? Yes? Okay. Yep. Happy to share.
So I think one of the key words is love. And, love, if you are even not so much responsible, or you can be open-hearted, or sometimes you can be closed. But if you are kind and if you love your children and you love the students, you will absolutely be open. And I don't know, love is the key word, I think, in everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Passion, love. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's that comes the love that you have for your students, and the passion that you have for your profession. I think those are there, and I kind of feel that they come under the wholeheartedness thing. But it's nice to sort of further define it. So thank you very much.
You too.
Great. So that was Dewey. So we're now going to focus on CPD. Now, the reason, why do you think I talked to you a little bit about Dewey before talking about CPD? Because, as Stephen sort of mentioned earlier, it's also about motivation, isn't it? Because if you are going to engage in continuing professional development, you have to have the motivation to engage in continuing professional development. Otherwise, you're not going to do it, or you'll do it in a half-hearted way. So if you have these characteristics, they also lend yourself to engaging in meaningful professional development and actually applying that professional development to what you're doing in the classroom. You see a sense or a reason for it. So here we go. What are the aims of CPD? By the way, it is continuing. I noticed that in our thing she used continuous, but certainly we like to focus on continuing professional development because it's an ongoing process. So I know continuous means that as well, but we kind of put the emphasis on continuing. So what are the aims of CPD? Well, I think what the research shows us is where teachers engage in professional development, it positively impacts on the quality of teaching and learning in the classroom. Where teachers don't engage in CPD, go to the negative, they become fossilized in what they do, they become bored with what they do, their students become bored, they repeat the same lesson plans, the same things, and it negatively impacts the quality of teaching and learning. So it's a very obvious statement, but it's good to make that statement right at the very beginning. And I think that evidence from all sorts of research has shown that teacher effectiveness is the single most important part of improving the quality of teaching and learning in the classroom. Infrastructure is important, technology is important, having nice classroom furniture is important, having interactive whiteboards, these are all things that are important. Children being well fed and being warm or cool in the classroom, these are all important. The environment's important. The textbooks are important, the curriculum's important, all of these things are important, but the most important thing is the teacher, because it's the teacher who facilitates learning. And that's why we put so much effort onto the teacher, into helping the teacher have opportunities for professional development. So there's some other writing there. I mean, the idea is that we should, the focus of professional development should completely link to what happens in the classroom, should have an impact in the classroom. And again, reinforcing what Stephen said earlier today about, he talked about impact on learning outcomes. And I think that's absolutely key as well. So that's why CPD is often on specific things. And we talked about the needs of teachers as well, and being very specific about that. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute now. So CPD is likely to have more sustained impact on teachers when it is driven by teachers. Now I know Stephen went through some of these, and I'm reinforcing them and rewording them, I suppose, perhaps putting in an extra one, and maybe you could test your own knowledge and understanding, see if you can spot the difference. Do you play that game with your students, spot the difference? It's good for good life skills. Which one would it be developing, spot the difference? Critical thinking, maybe? Yeah? All right, something like that. Okay, I'm rambling. So CPD is more likely to have a positive impact when it is driven by teachers themselves. So the agenda for the CPD is not from a teacher educator, from the in-service institute, from academics at universities, from the Ministry of Education even. It actually should be driven by teachers. They understand the areas of their practice that they would like to focus on and think about and understand more about. Needs to be aligned with the curriculum that the teachers are actually using. There's no point coming in, opening a suitcase and doing some activities that bear no relation or relevance to what the teacher's curricula is. So I think that's really important. I think the other point is that, Stephen mentioned this earlier today as well, is that it takes place over time. It's a continuing process. It doesn't happen instantly. It's a slow process. Change is always slow. It's sometimes difficult. But it takes place over time. And the more time we spend on it, and the longer we spend on it, the more successful we're going to be. It's also, I think this was the key point that was made earlier today. It needs to be linked to what actually happens in the classroom. So classroom, Stephen talked about, it needs to be classroom-based. He was talking about classroom shock, if you remember. But that idea of it needs to be based on what the teachers are actually doing in their classroom, and it needs to link the theory to the practice needs to inform the theory, and teachers have to see that link. They have to understand how to implement ideas and be helped through that process. Encourages reflection. I think we were talking about John Dewey. I think this idea of reflection is absolutely key. When you try something new in the classroom, you have to be able to reflect on how it went, what happened. Was it successful? And, it's not good enough to go, that went well. You have to think, try and get some evidence for that. How do I know that went well? I mean, that's quite important. Get some evidence. How do I know that went well? And, what made it go well? What was the thing that made it go really well? And can I apply any of that to anything else that I'm doing? So that sort of level of analysis is part of reflection. It's not, that was good, thumbs up, or thumbs down. Or if it didn't go so well, again, very valuable. Reflection helps us. Well, why didn't it go so well? Is it because the whole thing was rubbish, or is it because it was that way that I did it didn't work? Maybe if I'd done it a different way, it might have worked. So we don't dismiss things out of hand. Yes, and this idea of collaboration, I think, is absolutely key. I'm a social constructivist at heart, so I believe that collaboration, working with others, talking things through, sharing ideas, sharing our pain, sharing our successes, bragging a little bit sometimes. These are all really sort of important things. We're all human beings. We don't live in isolation. And it's the same for our profession. We have friends, we have family, but we've also got colleagues, and we need to interact with them. And if you think about it, you probably spend 7, 8, some people spend more than that, hours of your day, that's at least a third of your day, working on doing your work and working with colleagues. That's a large proportion of your life. And teachers need to have that process of friendship, interaction, feeling supported, and so on. And the last point is kind of interesting because this was, actually Stephen and I were talking a little bit about this, that you can have a lot of interaction and a lot of discussion and so on, but actually you need to learn things too. We have to get new input. Otherwise you're just recycling the same dirty water. That's not a very good image. I'll change that image. So apologies for that. So anyway, you're not just recycling the stale air, maybe as another way of doing it, but you're actually bringing in fresh air, bringing in new ideas, and so on. So now, teacher activity groups, tags, we call them tags for short. Do you know a game called tag, by the way? Did you play this as a child? Maybe this is a very sort of English term. I'm not even going to challenge Stephen on that. But tag is basically, kids like to chase each other. But no, not tug, tag. So children like to chase each other, and someone is it, like they're the monster or something, and they run, and then if they catch someone and touch them, then you say tag, and then they become it, and everyone else runs away from them. Did you play this game? Did you play this game? Not saying you do it now. Okay, so in a way, the idea of tag is very much about touching. It's about communicating. It's about being in contact as well. But it actually stands for teacher activity groups. So the idea of a teacher activity group has come out of teacher clubs, or English clubs for teachers, which you probably are familiar with. And I was doing some work quite a few years ago in India, and we were exploring with the idea of teacher clubs and how do we support teacher clubs. And we did quite a lot of research looking at teacher clubs in India, and we've got a very vibrant scene of teacher clubs there. And what we found was that teacher clubs were great, but that it was always the same 2 or 3 teachers who did everything. And the fact that it was teachers, often the sessions they had, they made a big effort, they sat down, they met together, one teacher would bring something, they'd share it, maybe they'd discuss it and talk about it. But often the clubs lacked resources and lacked direction. So what we thought was that taking on this idea of a teacher club, this grassroots, bottom-up, sort of, which is all the strengths of a teacher club, but that we can support it, so we can provide some resources, a bank of resources that teachers can access and use. We can sort of work with a facilitator, who's not a trainer, not an educator, but a facilitator, someone who can guide the club's activities, to make sure people are coming, to make sure people are communicating, allocate roles to different people, that kind of thing. So a facilitator doesn't lead the club, but certainly facilitates the club's idea. So we experimented with all of this, and we had a couple of projects in India, and we decided that we couldn't call them clubs because they weren't that self-directed, they were supported. And so we came up with the idea of teacher activity groups. And the idea of a teacher activity group is that we support a facilitator and we provide a bank of resources. And basically that's it. That's it. And the facilitator has the responsibility for gathering together teachers from their local community, often, if it's a big school, just teachers in their school, but it could also be teachers from surrounding schools as well, working out a time to meet. From our experience now, it's always good to embed this within the Ministry of Education so that there's a time for a monthly meeting, a monthly face-to-face meeting, and a venue. Sometimes these are rotated around schools, but there needs to be a place for that. And the facilitator also, he becomes familiar with the resources, the materials, the sort of sequence of a variety of activities that they can do. So it's not always the same thing, but there's maybe a video to watch, there's an article to to read, there's a debate topic or something, there's some other different activities. So there's a mixture of activities, and the facilitator understands the importance of that. So I think the key thing about teacher activity groups is that the teachers are at the center of the CPD process. And there is an inherently social aspect to this process. And I talked about that idea of touching, but also of communicating, feeling love, sharing ideas, supporting each other in a kind of a supportive environment. And I think that's really provided through the teacher activity group. What happens is that between the face-to-face meetings, teachers stay in touch, usually through a WhatsApp group or a Facebook page. So they stay in touch with each other, they share ideas, they keep it, how are things going? So that social thing carries on. And in fact, I was talking to a colleague who had done some research into MOOCs. Very interesting. And she had basically set up the idea of a MOOC group, which also sounds nice in the mouth, a MOOC group. So she had set up this idea of a MOOC group, which was, because she'd found out that teachers who very enthusiastically start to sign up and they start to study a MOOC. Do we all know what a MOOC is, by the way? Yeah, okay, good. I was just testing. Okay, so teachers who sign up to a MOOC, it's an astonishing figure. It's something like 14 or 17% finish the MOOC. It's a tiny percentage. So what she wanted to do was to actually get everyone in a group to sign up to the same MOOC at the same time. And then they supported themselves, partly through face-to-face meetings, through these tags, but also through the social media interaction as well. And she had like a 95% completion of MOOC, which is astonishing. It's amazing that you can go from 17% or 15% up to 95%. And that is only because you're getting the support of your colleagues and friends. And you're supporting, have you done it? I haven't done it. Go on, just do it. Won't take long. Look, I'll give you write this one for the first bit, or, that sort of encouragement. Expectation as well. Have you done it? Yeah, I've done it. That's there as well. So this idea that you can actually study things together is really important as well. And this links to the idea of communities of practice. Other tags have embarked on collaborative action research. So they've actually looked at the idea of researching things together and finding out, choosing a topic, deciding on the research questions, looking at the tools, working together, supporting each other, doing some reading, finding different things to read, sharing their readings, deciding on their action, their plan of action for the research, collecting their data, bringing their data together, deciding about the analysis, supporting each other through the analysis of that data, synthesizing all their data together, and then sharing the results of their research with other people at a conference like this, for example. But it's not just one person doing research, it's collaborative action research. And there's such a strength and power to that, and these kind of groups can really do that. So yes, there's a change through reflection, and there's a clear practical classroom focus, because these are teachers, they're meeting in their little communities, they all have the same schools, the same learners, the same environments, the same curriculum. They all have similar kind of issues and problems, and what they're very much focusing on is their own practice and sharing and discussing their own practice together. Okay, so interesting. We've done quite a lot of research on these now, and I'm going to show you in a minute all the places where we have tags, and there are now even more than that. So we've done quite a lot of research, some impact studies, evaluation studies, and what it's shown is that actually these tags lead to improvements in teachers' English language proficiency, because they're reading more, they're talking more, and if you think about teachers in quite isolated communities, when do they ever use English? It's only ever in the classroom, and it's only the language that their learners are using. of a little bit of classroom language. So this provides them with an opportunity to use a lot more language, read more, write more, talk more, listen more. Motivation. We've discovered huge rise in teachers' motivation who are on these teacher activity groups. They're more enthusiastic about their teaching. They're happier to go into work. Confidence. A lot of teachers report that they are just more confident. They're more confident about what they're doing in their classroom. They have reassurance, I suppose, from their colleagues that these things work and that they're doing good things. Mr. Stephen talked about that feedback being so important. So yes, the confidence is there. Their theoretical knowledge of methodology, just that sort of background knowledge. Teachers often don't really get a chance to engage in why they're doing what they're doing, and this gives a good opportunity for that. Practical skills increase, classroom performance increase. I don't like that term, but it's true. Reflective skills, they actually get better at reflecting because they're doing it so often, talking to each other. Collaborative skills and collegiality, and their attitudes to professional development. They also get better at technology, using technology, their knowledge about technology, and their skills in technology. So, key success factors. What makes a tag successful? Firstly, needs to be supported from administration. So the school has to know about it. The director of the school, the head of department has to support it. Needs support from administration. Tag facilitators are very special people. They are my heartthrobs. I love them because they are the ones who will make a difference into what they really do follow duty. They have wholeheartedness and they feel that responsibility for their tag. What was the other one? Openness, of course, yeah. Yes, we need to make sure that they have relevant and meaningful resources. What our research, our impact study has shown is that sometimes the tag groups go through the resources like a textbook, and that's actually not good, because what they should do is they should pick and choose the activities, the topics, the things that are relevant, the things that are interesting, because at the end of the day, it's like you being here over a weekend. It's the things that are interesting are the things that will make you do it. Where are we up to? Focus on action plans and reflection. I think this is another key feature of an effective tag, is where at the end of their face-to-face session, the tag draws up an action plan. This is what we are all going to do before we meet again. And I think they all go away with a checklist of little things that they're going to read, or they're going to try out in their classroom, or they're going to ask their learners, and things like that. And opportunities to meet and communicate with each other. What time are we finishing? I forgot to look. I've got 10 minutes. Oh, good. Okay. I'll tell you a story then. I was working with a teacher who was setting up what she called reading seminars. And so it's interesting because I have a concept, I have an idea of what a reading seminar is. And, I was an academic, I was at the University of Exeter, I lectured at the University of Exeter many years ago. So I know what a reading seminar is. And for me, a reading seminar is you get a set list, article to read, or a couple of articles to read. You do your homework, you read those, you highlight bits, you come up with some questions, things that you would like to discuss. Similar to, anyway, I was at a presentation today, I was hoping to see her, where you actually read through things and you come up with sort of deep, meaningful questions to ask and so on. And then you use your face-to-face time, the seminar time, to discuss the article. And I was shocked when Lamia, this lady, told me that in her group, with her reading seminars, they read the article together. And I was like, well, that's like being at primary school, but why would you want to reading aloud? So they basically take it in turns to read aloud. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not good. That's where is the discussion? Where is the critical thinking, the analytical sort of development? Where are you sort of looking at implications and so on? You're just sitting there reading aloud? And she was like, yeah, that's what the teachers wanted to do. So I said, to my shame, I said, oh, you have to stop that. You have to go and do it properly. Don't do it like that. But she said, a couple of weeks later, I saw her, and I said, well, a month later, I said, how did it go? She said, no, we're still doing that. And I said, well, she said, please come and see, and come and talk to them, and see what it is that we're doing and how it's done. So I said, okay, fair enough. So I went along, and it was like that. They were sitting there, round in a circle. They decided they were taking in turns to read paragraphs aloud. I mean, their English level was probably B2, low B2, a high B1, something like that. But they were reading these paragraphs aloud to each other. And they were correcting each other's pronunciation. And they were correcting, and what was really interesting was they didn't mind. You know, they were like, and they would then repeat it if they got the pronouncing word. And then the reader would sometimes stop and say a word, and then sometimes stop and say, I don't know what this word is. And then some other people would say, oh, it's this. And then someone else would say, yes, or no, it isn't, and so on. And then when they got to the end of the paragraphs, they were sort of talking about that. So what does this say? What do we understand by this? And they were doing it. And I sat there and I thought, well, this is actually quite good. And it's what the teachers want to do, and it's how they want to do it. And my preconceptions and ideas are absolute nonsense. So anyway, that's a story that teachers, given the freedom and given the confidence, can actually work out ways of doing things for themselves that are meaningful for them. Okay, so right. So this is where we've had some other tag projects. We've now currently got, well, it's actually a lot higher than that now. It's over 50,000 teachers are involved in tags. We've been doing some interesting work in Palestine where teachers have not been studying a MOOC together, but they've been studying modules from Teaching for Success resources. So they've decided, they looked at all the modules, and they said, we'd like to study this module together, and then they've decided on that, and then they go ahead and they study that module together, doing some of the work between their face-to-face meetings, using face-to-face meetings to sort of clarify things and share progress. Jordan, Egypt, Romania is an interesting one. I actually went to Transylvania. This is an English for Communities project in Transylvania, and they've got some really interesting teacher activity groups going there. India, we've still got one big one going in India with the TJAS project. My project down in South India is not going anymore, but the teacher activity groups are still going, even though the project's no longer going. And more recently now, we've launched these teacher activity groups across Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, which is where I'm based, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia as well. So these are the sort of countries that are actively involved. We have just starting, will be in the new year, a large project in Turkey as well, where we're going to be utilizing this tag methodology. So I think that's interesting. And we're coming to the end. Before I've got one more slide I want to share, but before I finish, does anyone have any questions about teacher activity groups that they'd like to ask? Yes. Good question. Adi, how can anyone join a teacher activity group? Well, they are being piloted at the moment as part of our project that we're doing around learning hubs in isolated communities. And I was actually discussing this with the Deputy Minister yesterday, or we had a meeting yesterday, talking about this is a potential model of professional development that we can roll out. And I think she's very keen to sort of see how this pilot groups that we've got going, the success from those is going. To be perfectly honest, if you want to set up a tag, we're really happy to help because we've got loads of resources. It was very interesting in Belarus because I did some work in Belarus with 50 teachers, and it wasn't actually about tags at all. It was just some professional development. We were doing some work around professional development for them, and did a little bit of work around mentoring. And then I mentioned the idea of tags, and they said, tell us some more about that. So I went back and I did a 2-day workshop with this group of 50 teachers. And we've now got 20, 30 tags operating across Belarus in quite remote communities, using all these resources and so on. So I think sometimes when you inspire teachers, when you give them that motivation and you give them that head start, it just takes itself away. And that's one of the most valuable things about it, is that it's self-directed. You know, it requires resources from us, but that's all electronic. I mean, we were happy to provide all the resources that are needed for that. I mean, perhaps some orientation or training for the facilitator, but you know, some of it's fairly intuitive anyway if you're that sort of person and got that kind of background. And then there's no other real financial investment. I mean, you know, meeting face to face, that's good. There is one more thing, and I'm looking at the time. There is one more thing I wanted to share with you, which I think is quite important. I am the director of a regional project which is called Future English, and we're actually conducting some quite significant research into high school learners and teachers, looking at why school leavers are leaving school without the right sort of English skills to take proper advantage of employment or further education opportunities. So we're doing some research around that. We're going to be looking at students' language levels, not in Armenia, but in some other countries. But we are going to be looking at teachers' perceptions of how well they feel they're meeting the needs of their high school students, secondary school students, and so on. Part of that project, that's one part, is research, but the other part of that project is we are currently developing a new platform through the Thinking Cap at LMS, which is, we're calling it at the moment, is a virtual tag. And this will be a place, so rather than teachers communicating with each other through Facebook or WhatsApp, this will be a platform where teachers can create an e-portfolio, some of which they can share and some of which they can keep private, but that will be where they can keep voice recordings, they can put articles there, they can put their reflections, etc. But then they'll connect up to their geographical tag, so they'll have their little community there, and they'll be able to communicate with that, their geographical tag. If they don't meet other teachers face to face, then they can meet up with other teachers from their community. If they're in an isolated, or remote, or conflicted area, they can still meet up with other teachers and establish a virtual tag there. And then those tags can meet up with other tags, you've seen where they all are, and they can sort of interact with each other. So that's something that we are going to be rolling out in the new year, and that certainly, you know, through the British Council, you'll be able to sort of access that and establish on that. And then, of course, that links fairly seamlessly to all of our Teaching for Success resources, and it also links to our Teaching English website as well, and all the things that are there. Great, so, as promised, we've just finished today, so I've talked about tags, that's finished now. Just because this is, you're about to go away, I think it's very good for you to reflect on what we've had today. You've been to a number of different sessions. I think there are some recurring themes. You might want to do a synthesis activity, it's high-level thinking, where you synthesize the ideas from all the different talks. Or there might be something practical that you looked at today. And this also counts for tomorrow as well. So, if there is something that you've learned, heard about today, that you would like to follow up further, think how you're going to follow this up. So, first step is you need to think about understanding it more. That means you're going to have to go away and do some reading, do a bit of Googling, try and find out a little bit more information about it. Think about how can you apply this to your classroom. And then think about evaluating the difference that makes. So how are you going to find out whether it's been effective or or not. And that sort of planning your monitoring and evaluation in advance is also quite useful. That's the analysis. And then think about how you're going to share that with others, next year's conference or something sooner as well. And I'm going to just finish with one little story anecdote. This is about a teacher who a good friend of mine, and he heard in a conference, it was about effective feedback and so on, and there was a comment about private and public praise. So this is about giving feedback in the classroom. Do you know about private and public praise? Have you heard that concept before? Okay, so the idea is, do you praise your students in front of everyone, or do you do it quietly and privately so only they can hear it? And in the conference that he attended, the speaker said, private praise is better. And my friend said, no, it's not, can't be. Because I know he was teaching primary, actually lower primary level. He says when I teach that primary level, they like it when they're praised because their friends will know that they've done a good job, etc. So he decided that he was going to try and find it out more about it. So he did quite a lot of reading, and he was quite surprised by what he read about all of this. Then he decided to try out different ways of doing praise in his classroom. So he kept going with some of his public, his private places, going up to them and saying, it's a really good piece of work to introduce private places, going up to them and saying, it's a really good piece of work, that's a really good thing that you said back there, that kind of thing. So he was doing all of that, and then after a bit, he sat with the children, and he said, I've been saying good to you, because the way he was saying was like, good. He was also doing that, clap for. Do you ever do that in your classrooms, where you say, wonderful, clap for Ivan, like this. So then he asked his students, well, which one, these children, he asked them, which one do you prefer? And they sat down. He had a little focus group, if you want to call it that. He sat down and asked them, which one do you prefer? They said, we love it when you tell us secretly. Yeah, and he was absolutely gobsmacked. He was like, how does that work? And he asked them, why do you prefer that? And they said, because you're talking to me. And you're actually, it's my interaction with you, and you're not just sort of announcing something to the whole class. So then he actually wrote that up, because he'd actually, so he got the evidence and he wrote it up, and he actually shared it with all his colleagues, and they were all equally gobsmacked that this was the right way to go, and they're very surprised. And then they tried it out in their classrooms. So that's a good example of how something from a conference can actually have a long-lasting and meaningful change, not just on one person's practice, but on their whole community's practice as well. Great, that's it from me. Thanks for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I add? I think this is a great opportunity just to answer to that question as well from the British Council Armenia side. So as I mentioned in the morning, as of now we have tags in 7 different countries through our English learning hubs. And the good news is that we are going to expand this, as Simon said, and we are going to have more tags in different cities. And our effort is to make sure that we are going to have tags in every single city and region as much as possible. For this, we are working with the Ministry of Education, and we will identify where we can go. But if you're based in Yerevan, actually, we do have 2 tags, and we are going to expand them most probably to 4. So you will see this information publicly on our website and on our Facebook page, and you can join if you want to. Okay? Just for you to know.
Thank you. So that's practically it. Thank you very much for your attendance. But before you leave, allow me to introduce a couple of reminders, a couple of remarks regarding tomorrow's conference. So, as you know, we're going to start at 10 a.m. tomorrow as well, but you will have to re-register in order to receive your certificate at the end of the day. The second thing I would like to remind you about is that there is an event called Yerevan Marathon, which is going to be held tomorrow, and some of these central streets roads are probably going to be closed. Yes, so make sure you leave home early enough to be here.